Welcome everybody to Minority Rights Group International's event, Technology to Leave No One Behind, ? Where we will be exploring the role that technology has in realising the rights of sign language users and persons with disabilities from Indigenous and minority groups. So my name is Lauren Avery. I am the project officer for Minority Rights Group Minority and Disability Intersectional Discrimination Project. But I'm very pleased to introduce our three excellent speakers today. So we have Alexander Blocks, who is a deaf rights activist from Belgium. Hi, Alex.
Hello, everyone.
We're also joined by Christine Candy, who is an Indigenous and disability rights activist from the Endorois Indigenous Women Empowerment Network in Kenya. Hello, Christine.
Hello, everyone, and I'm happy to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Christine. And also we're joined by Dr. Aussie Stewart, who is a Black disabled academic and an equality and diversity consultant based in the UK and is joining us from London. Hi, Aussie.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to you all from damp and cold London.
Brilliant. Okay, so before we get started on our speakers, I'm just going to give a short introduction to the event. Welcome to everybody who has joined us on Facebook Live and also those who have joined via the Zoom as well, directly into the Zoom call. We have international sign language interpretation services available, and also we have closed captioning, which you can turn on if you're in the Zoom call at the bottom there. So this event is part of the Minority Rights Group's Key Trends Report webinar series, where we are highlighting different themes in our annual Key Trends Report. This year, the theme of the report is technology, a very important topic. And I'm very, very proud and pleased that this is also the first year where we have had significant contributions on disability and sign language, including an excellent case study from Alexander about technology and the rights of sign language users in Belgium and Europe, which we'll be talking a little bit about later. So today's event, we're going to be questioning such ideas that technology is designed for all and is used in a neutral way. Article 9 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which relates to accessibility, expresses that states have responsibility to ensure equal access of persons with disability to communications technologies, systems, and other public services in both rural and urban areas. More and more other public services, as we all know, are relying more on technology, whether it's in education, in transport, housing, medical services in particular, social services, entertainment, of course, and workplaces. Article 20 of the CRPD on personal mobility refers to the rights of persons with disabilities and the rights that they have to access assistive devices, and I believe that's something that Christine will be talking a little bit about as well. So this can range from things such as mobility devices like wheelchairs and walking frames to communications devices such as hearing aids and eye gaze technology, just to give a couple of examples. So each of our speakers today will be talking about very different scenarios and contexts, from sign language communities to Indigenous communities and to Black and ethnic minority communities in a global North country. But I believe that there will be an important thread running through the event today. So I'm very pleased now to pass on to Alexander, who will be talking through his case study on technology and the rights of sign language users. If you haven't read the case study already, I think my colleague will be sharing it in the Facebook chat there, so please do have a read of it. It's an excellent case study. Alex is a human rights officer at the World Federation for the Deaf, but today he joins us in his personal capacity as a deaf human rights activist, focusing on the situation in Belgium and Europe. Alex, welcome. The floor is yours.
First, I'd just like to offer you my gratitude to Lauren and to MGRI for inviting me today to come and give a presentation about my story. So my name is Alex. This is how you sign my name. I am from Belgium. I'm a deaf individual, and I grew up in a deaf family. My parents are deaf. My grandparents are deaf. So I'm the third generation of deafness in my family. So I can give you that perspective of what it looks like, what it felt like to grow up in a sign language environment. At the same time, I was learning how to read and write. So I grew up using Belgian French Sign Language as well as writing French. One moment. So I grew up signing in my household, and I've had a rich experience from that. And at the same time, I was learning the spoken language French in a written format. But sign languages have grammar and structure, syntax, and all the things that spoken languages have to be considered full-on languages. So sign languages are equivalent to spoken languages because they have all of those features. And there's not just one sign language in the world. There's hundreds of different sign languages, over 200 different sign languages, in fact. So throughout history, we've seen that deaf individuals and sign languages have been considered, have been oppressed. And that the worldview on sign languages have been that they're not equivalent to spoken languages. They've been considered less than and not equally respected. And this oppression, where it came from and how it really began, lives back in history. So if we go back to the year 1880, there was a conference which took place in Milan. It was the International Conference on Deaf Education. And in this conference, they had various professionals, different stakeholders attending this meeting, where they talked about what the best practices were for teaching and educating deaf children. So in this environment, there were no deaf people present. However, they were talking about the education of deaf people. Through this Congress, they ratified a policy which did not allow for sign language to be used in the instruction of deaf children, and they adopted an oralist philosophy. And what this philosophy allows for is basically saying that sign language will dumb down deaf citizens, and that they won't ever be able to be successful and achieve much in life if they rely on sign language for communication, and that the preferred method for teaching deaf people was speech. And this had massive consequences and continues to have consequences today, and has massively impacted deaf people's education, where they've been forced to learn through auditory and oral methods instead of using visual tactics to teach them. So some examples of that, I can use examples from my mother and my grandmother's experience. They were both born in Romania during the communist era, and they've told me about their experience at the deaf school in the capital. And they talked about how the teachers, when they saw them signing, would physically hit them with a stick or with a ruler. They would tie their hands behind their back to force them to use their voices. So these are examples of how the world has viewed sign language in a very pejorative way, and has forced people, deaf people, to use their voices instead of using their hands and visual communication. So the impact of this has been that deaf people haven't gotten a good quality education. They haven't acquired world knowledge. They haven't learned basic skills in how to interact with society. And they've been marginalized from society and lived very separate lives because of this tradition. So again, the deaf population has been marginalized due to their lack of education and lack of social awareness, because they've been marginalized and segregated. So in Belgium in 1980, around that time, we had a new branch of technology which allowed for captioning on television. And it was the first time that deaf people were finally able to understand what was happening in the world in various places, what the news was and what was happening. Before that time, they had to depend on other people for relaying that information. It wasn't until the subtitling and captioning came about that they started to have more equal access. And then in 1990, what you have is another piece of technology which allowed deaf people to communicate with one another. The fax machine came into play. There was the Minitel, which is a specific device that allowed deaf people to talk to each other, SMS on mobile devices. But it was all, again, these are all methods that are based on written language, which a lot of deaf people, because of the lack of quality of education, weren't comfortable. A lot of deaf people have not been literate. So within deafness, which is already considered a minority, you have another minority of deaf people within the larger deaf community who are fully literate in the spoken language. If I use an example from my grandfather's life, my grandfather would go to the deaf club, which is a place where deaf people would meet and gather. Now at the end of the evening, the way that they were able to discuss with each other when they were going to meet again was to discuss it at the end of the evening. So they would say, okay, let's all meet next week at this, this day, this time. And there would be times where my grandfather would be at the club and he would be waiting for hours and not know if a person was coming or not. Maybe somebody's car broke down on their way there. Maybe a friend had taken ill, and so they weren't able to be there either. There weren't any other ways of communicating. And then you have the advent of all this technology we've had since then. And then in 2000s, we have the internet, and that has completely changed the game for deaf people. Now we're able to video chat with one another. We've got smartphone devices, which allow for ease of communication. There's Facebook, Instagram, Skype, YouTube. I mean, there's all these visual platforms. So finally, deaf people are able to communicate in their natural and native languages instead of depending on the written format of the spoken language where they live. So now deaf people are able to get involved with politics and self-advocate. They're able to succeed as artists. And now the world is seeing them. So deaf people are finally, and sign languages are finally visible as a part of our general culture. And so now we're able to communicate with those who are not deaf and explain our culture, again, through these same means. So I can use what we're doing right now as an example. I'm able to participate in this event today and speak to you through a sign language interpreter. This gives me access. Now, 30 years ago, a deaf person wouldn't be able to do this. This would have been completely impossible. So this is a great example of how technology can level the playing field for deaf individuals that want to participate in society. I can order food to be delivered. I can be involved in various types of communication. And if I have an emergency and I need to access emergency services, I can do that too. There is a number that's been devised, which is 112, which works throughout Europe. So I can go to Spain, and if I have an accident there, I can reach out to this number and have emergency services come to support me. Now, within the 27 European countries, only 22 have this emergency service. But they don't all have it through sign language videos or through SMS, right? So within the 22, only 8 of them have the ability for a deaf person to have a video connection to the emergency services. Only 8. That's a very small percentage throughout Europe. And a lot of these services, within those 8, you even have to pay for in order to have the same access that everybody else has. And that's clearly not equitable. And now we have Corona, right? The COVID virus, which has has had an even greater impact on these services, right? So we see a lot more sign language interpreters being provided to talk about and to explain and to interpret the information being given on news. And news cycles, as you know, now are 24/7. Those services need to be 24/7 as well. So sign language has been brilliant, technology has been brilliant for the deaf community, but there have been some problems as well. So one of the things that has come about is avatars, and I have to say this is not doing the deaf community a service. The idea is that avatars can be used to replace sign language interpreters as a more cost-effective solution. But what we've actually seen is that there's a lot of problems because sign languages have a particular structure. These avatars aren't able to embody that. And with an avatar, rather than with a human being, it does feel quite mechanic and it doesn't feel very personal. Everybody else in the room being a human being, the deaf person doesn't want to have a machine, a robot, an avatar to be in the space with them, presenting them with the information. They also want a human body interpreting the information that's taking place in that setting. Another consequence, negative consequence, has been the invention of these sign language gloves that have come about. So the idea is that there are these gloves that understand sign language and that they can translate the information into text on a screen. And it sounds like a really great idea, but the deaf community has rejected this as well. And the reason why the deaf community isn't embracing this technology is that the people who have invented these devices are not deaf, right? They haven't consulted the deaf community as a part of their process. And it's really been matched for hearing signers, which means that deaf people that are trying to communicate with hearing people have to change their rate of signing. They have to make all these modifications to the language that they use to appease the people that don't understand sign language in this context. So I know a lot of people are very excited about these things, and there's been lots of different inventions that have come up over the years where deaf people have said, no, like we want our sign language rights to be recognized, and these demands by the deaf community have often been ignored. However, at the same time, people are so excited about all these other things that are being invented that deaf people are saying we don't want, that actually is not the solution for us, right? So this oppression, even with the advent of technology, is still taking place. You see this oppression happening throughout the world, and where deaf people are marginalized and segregated, instead of inviting the deaf community and recognizing the sign languages that they use as legitimate languages. So this conference the Congress that I spoke about earlier in 1880 in Milan, where they made oralism sort of the official way of teaching, has had a huge impact on the deaf community and education and all aspects of deaf people's lives from then until now. But what we need to do is really pay respect to deaf people and things that they are asking for, like language equity and language recognition. So I'd like to thank you all for listening to me today. And again, Lauren, thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you very much, Alex, for that really interesting presentation. I think you made some really, really important points about the way technology has completely transformed things and the rights of sign language users across the world, as you say, but that I liked what you said about the technology being used as oppression, as a tool of oppression, and I think that's a very important point that we're going to be looking at today, and I think that Dr. Aussie Stewart will also make some comments on that in his presentation. So I'd just like to say to everybody who's tuning in, please do ask questions. If you're joining us on Zoom, there is a Q&A function. You can type your question in there, or if you're joining us on Facebook Live, please ask questions in the chat there, and we'll try to answer them as we can. So if you have questions for Alex, please do ask them. I just wanted to follow up, Alex, and ask you one more question, if that's okay. So if you can come back on video and join us, thank you.
Yes, certainly, please do, ask away.
Brilliant, okay. So we'll come back and ask some more questions at the end, but just for now, to follow up, can you talk a little bit about the importance then of having computer skills and computer literacy for members of the deaf community when you talk about technology being such an important tool in communicating, in advocacy, which is very, very interesting. Can you talk a little bit about equity in kind of computer skills and computer literacy and technology literacy for the deaf community?
Well, I think it's the same for people who are not deaf, right? There's been a lot of generations of people who are not comfortable with smartphones and computers and video technology. When I think about my parents, my grandparents, I mean, they have no hope, right? They really struggle with using technology. So I don't know that there's a difference in terms of acquiring those skills. I think that's a generational thing. And I do think it's really important to encourage the youth to really take the brunt of the advocacy work, because they do have more knowledge of technology and how to use it, and this computer literacy that you talked about, right? So what we need to have is the youth, the older generation, supporting the youth in the deaf community who have this knowledge, who understand, who are much more comfortable with technology, to use those skills in their advocacy work, which the entire community then benefits from, right? We want to have deaf people involved and have political participation, and this will allow them to do so and to be able to participate. And those links will be made, and we'll be able to bridge that gap.
Absolutely, I think that's a very important point about that generational link and advocacy being led by younger people who perhaps have grown up with it and feel more comfortable. So yeah, that's an excellent answer. Thank you, Alex. We'll come back to you with some more questions later, hopefully.
I will welcome the questions at that time. Thank you.
Okay, so following on from Alex's excellent presentation, we're going to move on to our second speaker, Christine Candy, who is joining us from Baringo County in Kenya. So hi, Christine, if you can turn your video on now so everyone can see you.
I'm told I cannot start my video since I was not the one who okay.
Ah, there we go. We can see you now.
Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you, Christine. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Laureen. Thank you, Alexandra, for your informative presentation, and every other speaker. I'm happy to be here today with all of you, and I wish to share my personal experience and work, since I'm one of the person with disability. I'm physical, with physical disability, that is it. So I wish to share my my kind presentation, and I'm going to go directly to share my screen. As all about me, I'm Christine Kandia from Baringo County. I'm one of the Endorise community. This is a community which had a long struggle for land rights, and we are based in Lake Bogoria. And we had a case which we did it to African Commission, and later on we had a ruling at the African Commission way back in 2010. And after that, we had a long period of implementation. Some of the issues we brought before the commission has been implemented, like identification, like getting some royalties out of economical activities taking place from the lake. And others are yet to be implemented, like restitution and compensation for the loss we've suffered when the government evicted us from our ancestral land. So all this period, we've had a period of struggle, both for the community and for special people, that is people with disability. Myself, being one of the community members, play a critical role, being a leader, and again, being one of the person with disability from the community, I've not been left behind. I've been part of the struggle for the rights of my community. So most recently, like 2 years ago, I started focusing more on work of my community, special focus for person with disability, because I realized that I'm a woman, I'm a person with disability, and we experience a lot of challenges that comes out of you being of that characteristics. So I realized when we did our community forum, these are people who are left behind. We've been left behind in so many development, be it for decisions, be it for about the community. And that is how I came in and tried to register a community-based organization called Eldoret Indigenous Women Empowerment Network. This is a community-based organization registered in Kenya with the office in Nakuru. And we founded in 2016 and registered it in 2019. And as I've said, it was the Eldoret women who are committed to improve the standard through the capacity building of Indigenous women, marginalized persons with disabilities, and girls. Organization formation was cited by a number of issues, that is challenges women and girls, elderly youth, and persons with disabilities faces when they are left behind. Non-involvement of vulnerable group in decision make leave a lot of in terms of development and realizing personal goals for sustainability reasons. So the marginalized group are most vulnerable in our society, as I've explained to you, that their voices needs to be involved so that to enable them to realize development, social, economical, and political. There is also need to enhance their voice on natural resource rights, and that is what we did. AUN aim to build their capacity through trainings, mentorship, education, existing policies, legislation, and protect their fundamental rights such as Constitution of Kenya, public participation, LD rights, Community Land Act, and the FGM, issues of climate change and other legislation that will boost their self-determination, and grow them into leadership. So over the period of Corona, we've developed programs to reach out with people with disability, and you can see it from the screen on my table and the screen. Yeah.
Christine, sorry to interrupt you. We can't see your slides yet. Have you shared them?
Yes, I have.
I'm afraid we can't see the slides, sorry. But if you can describe them, that would be great.
Okay, you are screen sharing. Yes, I've shared it. But anyway, so okay, maybe there is some technological challenges, but I have tried to share them.
That's okay, don't worry. We always have technological problems. It's to be expected.
Yes.
So, yeah, please just describe for us.
What we do is that to produce, we realize through the WHO. Through WHO, we had through WHO, through the advertisement they had in the WHO, we came up with some of the pictorial pictures specific for people with disability, and we share them like symptoms, prevention, and what is all about Corona, because we realized that when information came, people with disability were left behind in terms of giving out the right information, like preventive measures, what they are supposed to do to minimize the spread of Corona, and to observe personal hygienes. You know, people with disability are most vulnerable groups in terms of because their immune is a little bit down, and these people at all the time are ignored in terms of information, in terms of planning. When it comes to the government planning, all governments across the world, they don't plan for people with disability, even at this time whereby we have serious issues that has affected the world. So we formulated in a way that the information could go directly to people with disability and try to understand. We've done community forums observing the issues of social distancing and trying to educate people with disability, getting interpreters in our sessions. And we realized that doing it through getting interpreters and educating people with disability, we realized that through that one, the government and the all other agencies have been leaving behind people with disability in terms of information dissemination, especially deaf people. Deaf people at all the times when the government design program to reach to their groups, they leave behind people with disability, they leave behind deaf people or even the blind for that case. So we through our program, we were able to get interpreters to interpret all this to them, what is corona, what they can do to minimize, and they were really helpful. And for the first time, you know, through my program, we're able to integrate people with disability with other community members, because at the end of the day, the carekeepers of these special groups, the carekeepers are the general public. So we need not to isolate people with disability from the general public. We need to integrate them. We call for community meetings, having people with disability, and then the general public, so that at the end of the day, they will be the first caregivers, and they will not understand their problem. When the government try to maybe reach out on the specific unique things they face, it is the same people who can identify this group. So we need to educate the whole public with people with disability without leaving them behind. So that is what we did. And maybe if there is a question you wish to ask us, we are a small organization, but observing some technological, we are observing growth towards baby steps towards growth. So technology and people with disability, positive and negative aspect. The positive aspect that is that technology has helped with free access to information, freedom of expression, that is through website and social media. The second one is that information is well packaged for PWD in terms of audio description. Then I'm having some challenges with my screen. It keeps coming on and off. So I will always come back and both don't mind.
No, please don't start it again, because we only see our folders. So that's why I always stop it, because otherwise those who are following us on Facebook cannot see the interpret. Sorry.
So okay. So the positive aspect, I was in positive aspect number 2, that is information is well packaged for PWD in terms of audio description, subtitles, and signing for their access. Then there is enable them to fully participate. It has enabled them to participate in terms of if they got the required information, they will be able to participate and maybe share their voice, share their views, because they're able to get the right information and they will be able to respond. Then the use of internet has allowed the indigenous person with disability to communicate with each other, even with the distance. So you remember this time whereby the whole world borders is locked, so they are able to communicate with one another and all that. So the negative aspect is that deaf cannot participate in audio and video conferences, since there is a missing opportunity. You remember, like this is my first time to participate in this kind of conversation whereby we have an interpreter. For a long time, we are missing interpreters in such kind of communication, even at the international platform. So I want to congratulate MRG, because this is the first thing, if all the world could emulate this one and going forward, because if we do communication without an interpreter, even at international communication and all that, the virtual communication like this one, then we are logging behind a certain group that they will not be able to get such information. And then most of the people with vision disability have been found to have high level of computing and internet expertise. So this is deaf people that if they're given this opportunity, they will be able to maximize, because the deaf people have certain talent that they have been able to be given. So these people have been left behind. But if they are given the right computing and they are part of that process, they will give us the best of their talent. They do not practice or get opportunity due to the perception and discrimination against the PWD. So when someone looks at a person who is deaf, who is as vision challenge, they discriminate because they think they are not able to perform that duty. So there is that fear. So as an institution, the challenges we've been experiencing is the sustainability of project, because we are starting out venturing into this new field of trying to integrate person with disability in a community whereby, you know, person with disability is viewed as a curse. There is a lot of tradition attachment to person with disability. So that acceptance is a little bit challenged, but we are trying our best. There is barriers in communication with person with disability due to lack of tools to effectively pass information to them based on their various nature of disability. We all understand we have different categories of disability, and that one becomes a challenge. And so far, we are not able to, maybe with future going forward, is that we will be able to do data collection and know who has what kind of a challenge in terms of the kind of disability yes, for us to reach out on their needs. So we are best up in rural setup. That is one of the challenge. And most persons with disability do not have phones for easy communication, especially the getting a smartphone for them to maybe try to integrate, try to communicate. So it is all about what we do from my Indigenous community. That is what I've tried to do for the last 2 years. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. Thank you, Lorraine. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Christine, for that really interesting and insightful presentation. I think what you were saying about the use of technology to integrate persons with disabilities, not only into the community, but into activism, into advocacy, into other activities that are affecting Indigenous communities is really, really important. And I think that's one of the real positive sides of technology. I would like to ask you a question, if that's okay, Christine. Can you turn your video on and then we can see you? So the question I have was, could you tell us a little bit more about assistive technologies and what the access is like to assistive technologies for persons with disabilities in your community? So things like wheelchairs, hearing aids, things like that. What are the barriers to people accessing assistive technology?
Thank you for your question. The barriers to access assistive technology is that, you know, assistive technology assists people with disability to move around. This is like a mobility tool to them. It is one of the essential tools. So when you talk about barriers, is that there is that economical support. Most persons with disability come from disadvantageous background, especially economical part. They are not able to purchase. They are very disadvantageous because when it comes to decision that affects them, they don't get it. They are not involved in that decision. And you find that most of the education system, you know, one of the employment opportunities through education. When you are educated, you are able to maybe employed. When you are employed, you are able to support yourself. So one of the barriers is that most people, persons with disability, don't have economical advantage in terms of getting employment or being able to purchase assistive devices to be able to enable them move around. So most of them are vulnerable, and most persons with disability are found. Let me talk on behalf of the rural setup and Indigenous background, is that, you know, first of all, there is that stigmatization and traditional attachment that a person with disability is a curse. So at all the time, they are disadvantaged, they are disempowered, they are not educated, they are just there. They are just there, and few of them who are educated, they need to really struggle to get somewhere. So one of the barriers is that the issues of tradition. Then there is the issues of getting those assistive devices, because the government cannot get you assistive devices. You need to buy it. When the other one broke, you need to maybe try to fix it at your own cost. And these are the people who are disempowered. They are not at the economical advantage. So that one becomes a barrier of itself. Education also becomes a barrier, because these people are not given opportunity, or they are not educated. Because at the end of the day, they are left here at home because nobody is willing to take them. Like for my case, if you are physical disadvantage, you are not, the kind of education is not accommodative for you. You need to work, but you see, you need to be carried by your parents, but that one is an extra luggage to your parents. So they feel they're overwhelmed. So the best thing is to maybe you get some home care at home and stay there. So that one becomes a barrier on its own. Then there is the issue of, I've told you, there is the issue of politician during political process. They use that advantage to buy like 2 wheelchairs or walking sticks like that, scratches. So when they do that for political mileage to be seen like an empathy person who care for person with disability. But in real sense, they're using it to get some political advantage. But you see, in the constitution of Kenya, we have those opportunities reserved for persons with disabilities. So when the same constitution has given us opportunity, but these people are poor people. Some of them did not get education. The few who got education maybe don't have disability at heart. There are those people who, when they get to international government, they talk about political parties instead of talking of rights for persons with disability. So that what becomes a barrier again in enhancing or getting those services, because at the end of the day, it was the duty of the government to provide those assistive devices to their people, to those people with disability. So those one, among many others, are barriers in terms of getting those hearing aids to them. Some of them maybe might not have a severe kind of disability, but because of neglect from the government and all that becomes a challenge. So, yeah.
Thank you, Christine. So I think what you're saying essentially is it's a circle, isn't it, of exclusion, of discrimination, not being able to access information, not being able to understand your rights, not being able to get your assistive device, in which poverty and marginalisation are all part.
Yeah. So, yeah, there is the issue of poverty, which becomes difficult. And then there is the, we are people with disability from Indigenous community, whereby the whole community has been neglected for their rights. So when a community is neglected, then the same rights for person with disability multiplies. So it becomes multiple. So we experience so many other discrimination, and we are being pushed away from reality. Yes.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Christine. That was really, really insightful about the situation for the Endorois community and other Indigenous persons with disabilities all over, right? Because I'm sure a lot of these issues are similar in other places, and through our work, that's what we have discovered as well. Thank you so much, Christine. We'll come back to you hopefully with some questions shortly.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to move on to our final speaker now. So I am very pleased to introduce to you Dr. Aussie Stewart. Dr. Stewart is a disabled person from a Black and minority ethnic background in the UK. He is also an academic and an equality diversity consultant with 15 years of experience as a trainer and specialist advisor in the UK. He has spent 12 years as an academic at the universities of Oxford, York and Surrey, and has also written about the experiences of Black and ethnic minority disabled people in social care in the UK and internationally. It's a particular pleasure to have Dr. Stewart here today and to give the UK perspective, and that is for a few different reasons. First of all, there's the assumption by many people that, and I'm sure Dr. Stewart will agree, that the UK is not a racist society. Secondly, that the situation for disabled people in the UK is good or even a model for other countries, which I think is very questionable, and I'm sure you're going to talk a little bit more about that. So Dr. Stewart, over to you to tell us about technology access for disabled people from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds in the UK. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. As I share my screen, I'll just say this, that I'm an avid iPhone user and I've got sorts of technology in my flat which I could speak to, and it does all sorts of wonderful stuff. So I do use technology quite a lot. However, I'm also, like to talk about today, is about, as Lauren just hinted at, is the problems that come with this as well. And what I'm framing my question today's event is, if I can get a slideshow up. Let's go. That's cool. Hope you can all see that. I'm assuming you can.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah. Great. Basically, the question I'm asking is technology for who? This is admittedly from a UK perspective, but the things I've heard from both from previous speakers, really, Alex and Christine, has really speak to this in lots of ways. In many ways, they're talking about, I mean, Alex in context with his history of exclusion of deaf people from society through language or denial of language or natural being able to access language and communication very well. And also Christine talking about the inequalities that are profound within communities that she represents and speaks for as well. But there's always an assumption that technology is there to solve problems. Alex has hinted at this, but technology for who? Who controls this? So I'm going to say, first say 3 main points, 4 main points, I'll edit that out actually. Who is technology for? The value of technology, a trap for those who do not fit in, we'll talk about that. Inequality gap, technology is good for some. And also big data. Surveillance masquerading as safety. And big data at the end is obviously something we need to bear in mind when we think about accessing technology. The first assumption we all make is that technology is somehow neutral. If only we can all get a good access to it, fair access to it, we can be empowered by it. Alex is talking about communication technology, transforming the deaf community. And Christine is talking about the denial of access to fair access to technology, which is denying people, but say disempowering people, and creating poverty and profound disadvantage, or maintaining it. But gaining access to technology, is that really a neutral thing? I want to make 3 points about that. Say 3, 4, or more. Basically, I've been looking from I've been reading feminist disability theorists who's looked at technology from not technology, but access to spaces, access to the built environment. And what they really identified was that this is not a value neutral environment. What they mean by that is that built spaces like shops, buildings, whatever, are not neutral environments which we all share equally. It's actually, they're value loaded and are representative of the majority, excluding the minority. And the same can be said for technology too. There's no such thing as value neutral technology. Somebody controls it. It's designed for somebody, certain groups, but it excludes certain groups. And also, as we heard earlier, technology is not an arena everyone can access equally. In fact, it's designed by and controlled by affluent, able, white masculinity. And what this means is that it's designed for people who design it for themselves. What we've got to do is look at the gaming industry and the types of games that are created. First-person shooters, all sorts of things like that. Call of Duty, World of Warcraft. They are designed for white males, for white males. And anyone else is interested in that is conditional. Of course, there's been a phrase where gender has been an issue around this whole arena. So what they've simply done is made all the lead heroes, protagonists, female. But the actual technology, the actual targets, the actual games haven't changed at all. So access is, for others, is always conditional.
Dr. Stewart, I'm
Yes.
really sorry to interrupt you. We are having some technical difficulties in viewing the sign language interpretation on our Facebook live stream. Could I please ask you to stop sharing your video? Is that okay? Just because
absolutely no problem.
Inaccessible to our Facebook viewers. This is another example.
How's that?
That would be brilliant. So I'll stop sharing. If you could just,
Okay.
That would be fine.
I'll just talk through what I'm doing. It's
That would
easier.
be great. Thank you so much.
Actually, that's easier for me too. So, okay, is that right? Everybody okay with that? Okay.
Thank you.
Where was I? I was very excited by this. So there's no such thing as what my main theme is. Technology is loaded, it's controlled, and it's controlled by certain groups and excludes other certain groups. So basically, it maintains a constructed normality, which excludes difference. You can be deaf. You can be from minority communities. You can be a disabled person. Your access to technology is an afterthought. Like technology we're talking about today, sign language interpreters, and the way in which Alex talked about this new technology around robots. They're designed for other people because they think it's appropriate for them to normalize deafness. Let's move on. Sorry, get myself back into this. So I'm I'm actually multitasking here. So bear with me while I multitask.
That's okay. It's our fault for interrupting you.
The second point I want to make is value in technology. One of the biggest arguments people make for why disabled people should be included is that we are a major, deaf and disabled people, we're major consumers of technology. British Assistive Technology Association have argued that 2.4 billion per year is a deaf and disability market. And that should be tapped in lots of ways. And you've got Apple computers, for example, who make a virtue of making assistive technology through their apps and etc. But what this does is reduce disability to merely a commercial phenomena. There's no social justice. We do it because there's money involved. So if you've got no value other than money, you have no value in terms of making things accessible to you. So thinking of Christine's world, where profound poverty, people living in profound poverty, who have low commercial value, why should anybody provide assistive technology for those people? Because after all, we look at technology in terms of its economic value, not its social justice one. And that is a major threat to access and fairness in this term. And I'm getting a bit problem here. Here we go again. Yep. I'm in problems. 1 second. Yeah, this is not working as it's supposed to. Sorry about this.
That's okay. It all fits
in with
technology.
Yeah, I'm going to have to, yeah, for some reason, PowerPoint's designed to die on me. 1 second. Okay, I'm back in business. COVID-19 is a good example of this. During the pandemic, it hit UK in March 2020. Suddenly, we were all forced to communicate virtually. For a lot of deaf and disabled people, this created a major crisis because not many of them had access to computers or the online world. What we discovered was there were 3 things which were viewed vital to get people online. Access to a smartphone was the very first one. So you've got access to a smartphone, any form of smartphone, that was the first step. The second crucial step was access to data. You had a smartphone and you could afford or access data for free. That was very important too. And finally, which is absolutely critical, was to love to use the virtual software to communicate online. So education, teaching, and I know Alex referred to that too. Without those 3 things, access to smartphone technology, to a machine technology smartphone, access to data, and also be taught, somebody to teach you how to use it, you would be excluded. The success of that, those three things, was remarkable. People learning disabilities were suddenly able to do things virtually they were not able to do before, as an example. However, this only increased structural exclusion. If you're living in poverty, you had language communication was a major issue, whether it be deaf communication or through English not being first language. And also you lacked access to information, you would be excluded. So so COVID-19 actually increased the exclusion of people rather than included them. But again, the assumption is that, well, including into what? To a neutral playing field, a data playing field? Absolutely not. The last thing I want to refer to is what we call big data. In Britain today, to save money, social care services and healthcare services are investing heavily in what we call big data. This is data to capture the experience of people who use social care services and to say deaf and disabled people to ensure they receive the best services. That's the idea. So what's happening is social workers and people who access these people are inputting this information onto big servers, which then process it to come up with the best solution for those people. What's happening is that what actually does happen is people's private and personal circumstances become part of algorithms which got access to many different people. Objectively, they should be given permission to do this. But once that data is captured, it's impossible to know how it's going to be used. It could be used positively, where good services are identified and whatever, but it could also be used punitively. For example, somebody who is in debt could be identified as being at risk and then punitive policies put in place. But the main point is it's not controlled by the individual. So ethnic technology minorities in the 21st century. The major risk is this. It increases the divide between rich and poor. It increases inequalities between ethnic groups or within ethnic groups. It maintains big inequalities within deaf and disabled communities. It maintains the gender divide, reduces choice and control by taking data and control of your data away from you. Enhances the power of the state structures to sustain those inequalities. And technology, because it's seen as a commercial, is controlled by commercial industries, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, etc., is perceived as a commercial enterprise. But it should be social justice one. It's not. It is technology should be about social justice. But as long as it remains a commercial priority, we will deaf and disabled people will always have conditional access to this and always be last to access it fairly. I'll stop there because I was knocked off my stride a bit, but I think that's probably what I was talking about. Thank you, Dave. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Aussie. That was really interesting, and I'm sorry about the technical difficulties we had. I think that
no problem.
Also serves to illustrate one of your points, which is that technology isn't designed always for everybody. It isn't always designed to support sign language interpretation, for example, although it also might be our lack of experience as well. So apologies for that. So I'm just going to follow up with a question for you, if that's okay.
That's fine.
I thought Some of the things that you said were so interesting, especially around big data being used in social care settings, and also reflecting back on some of the points that Alex said as well, that things are being replaced, people are being replaced by technology. And I think that serves as a particular barrier to some persons with disabilities and people from certain communities. So a question that's come in on the Q&A here says, how can we help people with mental disabilities, and I'm not sure whether this refers to mental health or intellectual disability, but it could be both, to receive legal advice? I have experience with this discrimination, and I think that very much relates to what you were saying and what Alex was saying about replacing people with technology. So I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. First I'll say this: the law is way behind technology in terms of the way in which we're using technology, how we think about it, how we access it, and the assumptions are made around it. So the law isn't very helpful in regard to that. So accessing legal advice, you will be thinking about I imagine two areas. One is the practical thing of finding somebody to get legal advice from, and also the power of that legal advice to protect people, especially people with mental health issues, particularly with learning disabilities too. I mean, for example, a good simple example, in Britain now, after COVID-19, we know that people with learning disabilities has been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, and the death rates have been phenomenal. And they've been denied access to ventilators or fair access to treatment as well, and in terms of that, by other people's judgments of their value. So legal challenges around that are very difficult, because the assumption is people are doing their best, again, the given circumstances, given the availability of technology exists. But I would argue that this is a social justice issue, and the rights of people are being denied simply because of who they are. So what I would say is two levels here: the value of the person who's making the complaint, and also the quality of that legal advice and the strength of it in terms of equality of access to fair, good information. So I can't be great positive there, except to say there's a major problem about this. But I would say to people, absolutely, legal challenge should be the first thing you should be thinking about.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. Thank you, Dr. Stewart. And I think as well, I'd really like to highlight the importance of when we're talking about persons with disabilities, we also refer to and include persons with mental health conditions and intellectual disabilities, who are often the furthest left behind. So I'm afraid we've run out of time now. I would just like to give the opportunity to all of the speakers to join us and perhaps give it a final closing, very brief sentence, if that's okay, just to give the opportunity for everyone to say something if they would like to. I understand one of our sign language interpreters has to go now for another meeting. It's great to hear that you're in demand as well for these kinds of things. So if I could invite Alex and Christine back onto screen, and just to say a kind of final word. I'm sorry we've run out of time to ask questions, but perhaps we can do some other kinds of follow-up with some of the questions that we've had. Alex, do you want to say something?
Yes, my final thoughts. Sorry, one moment. So my final thoughts, about this very important, interesting topic is, these people that are making the decisions, people that are interacting with deaf people and the disability community, in terms of governments and academics, having these conversations without deaf and disabled organizations and persons there is the problem, right? If people want to create things, technology that will benefit us, they really need to involve us in that process to make sure that these are things and solutions that the communities actually need, right? We don't want this to be done out of a sense of charity, but we do need to work together, right? from this year and on, there needs to be a collaboration that takes place between the various stakeholders, including deaf and disabled people. So those are my final thoughts. I'm sure the other presenters will have something to add to that.
Thank you, Alex. I think that's a really important point, especially about inclusion of deaf and disabled people at every level and in every sphere to make sure that their needs are met. Christine, do you have any final comments for us?
Yeah, my final comment is that I'm really delighted that we are able to share progress in terms of realizing person with disability rights across the global. And I'm really enlightened by what Alexander has shared, and I'm able to get some information, and this will strengthen part of my work here in Kenya. And thank you, Alex, for that. We still have a lot in terms of struggle and realizing for the rights of persons with disability, especially some of us who come from the same background. And I'm happy that with the technology and that quest for the need to get us involved in the process, like participating in technology, so that we have a technology that favors or goes by our needs. And we are really looking forward into a situation whereby even the producers of the smartphones on all that, they will consider our needs when it comes to having the devices that matches what we need as people with disability. It is one of the avenues whereby across the globe, we are able to discuss a unique situation about the technology, challenges and achievements so far. And through this process that the new technology and the world has changed. So sharing of ideas and shaping those new ideas will really go towards meeting our needs. Thank you so much, MRG, for organizing this platform. I'm grateful. So thank you, everyone, that I was able to meet today. So thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Really important comments. And as you know, we're going to be carrying on working very closely with you and your community as well. Just a final comment to me. Thank you so much to all the speakers. I'm really sorry that we've run out of time, but I think that just goes to show that, you know, it's such an important event. These are really important issues. I'm particularly sorry that we didn't get to hear from Dr. Stewart more, but I hope that we will get the opportunity to work together more in the future on these issues. So thank you to all viewers for joining us, everyone for joining on Zoom, and people who have asked questions as well. And also a special thanks to Tina and Helsa for their excellent work in providing international sign interpretation for this event. We're very pleased to be able to do this, and it's something that we hope that we can continue to work with help from overseas interpreting for that, you know, their excellent service as always. So thank you to Dr. Stewart, to Alex, and to Christine in particular for your important words today.